Hey everybody, Dan here from Sci-Fi Models and Stuff, and today we're going to be talking about the Flashmaster hobby blades. Over the last few weeks I've been seeing a lot of ads for these hobby blades, which claim to be a flexible addition to the standard X-Acto blade that we all know and love. And supposedly these help to reduce flash around irregularly shaped objects. I decided to pick some up for our first Sci-Fi Models and Stuff product review. So the ads show a few different things. First, they show a really nice side-by-side of a 1/72 scale figure before and after using the blade. Then they show how the blade bends really far without breaking or any ill effects. Lastly, they show how the blade is fine enough to slice off some sprue ID numbers, which is really pretty compelling stuff. So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to see if the blades can do what the ads claim they can. Next, we're going to try the blades on different materials like 3D printed resin, traditional polyurethane resin, and paper. And finally, we're going to test the longevity of the blades and see how well they hold up. The blades arrived in a nicely little package tube, but be careful because it's small and easy to lose track of on a cluttered desk like mine. Also be careful when opening because I'm a huge idiot and I dropped them all. So when looking at this blade, it's important to realize what side you'll be cutting with. Traditional X-Acto blades would use this edge here, but you can see from the reflection that that's actually not the sharpened edge. Instead, use this one here. Don't be like me who started cutting and couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. These blades are super thin, so you might have some trouble getting them into your X-Acto holder. After a little bit of wiggling around, I was able to do it no problem. So really, to get the best bang for my buck, I need to find a kit with some flash. I rooted around my kit stash and found the perfect candidate, an old Italeri Reeboks of an old Zvezda kit. This is a Reeboks from almost 30 years ago and should be the perfect amount of garbage to act as a good test for these blades. I then scanned around the sprues of the kit to find a good candidate. Unfortunately for the purposes of this review, the head sculpts were actually all pretty clean. I decided to use a torso instead, which had a lot of flash, and then I found this hand here that's the perfect candidate for the blades. Alright, so first let's go through the process using a regular X-Acto blade. This is just your standard number 11 blade you can find pretty much anywhere. It's got a standardized thickness of about 2/100 of an inch. Now to remove flash on a part like this, it's pretty simple. Just requires a little bit of scraping and cutting. Next we clean up the seam with 500 grit sandpaper, and it looks okay. Alright, so now let's flip it over and try the Flashmaster blades. We talked a little bit about how much thinner it is, and according to the manufacturer, we're looking at about 0.005 of an inch in thickness. If my math is right, and it might not be, that's about 4 times thinner. You can see right away that the blade hugs the curves and definitely gets a little closer to the edge of the plastic. Works alright, but at this point I can't say it makes too much of a difference. But when we move on to the finger of this kit, we get an amazing result with almost no effort. I can't say for sure, but I suspect using a non-flexible blade would pretty much slice through this thumb. The Flashmaster, though, hugged the curve and cleaned up this part nearly perfectly. Alright, lastly, let's try to slice off some of the sprue detail like in the ad. Works really pretty great, and I think with some practice I could replicate the advertisement perfectly. Alright, let's try this on some 3D printed resin. I print with this material a lot, and it's kind of a pain to remove all the support nubs. They slice off okay with a traditional blade, but they can be hard to reach sometimes. I'm testing the Flashmaster on this 3D printed tire, and I found something amazing. While it cuts through supports and stuff just fine, using the curved blade to clean up an interior circle works truly better than I ever would have thought. If you were a car or maybe an armor builder that had a lot of plastic or resin wheels, this tool would be invaluable, really. Okay, let's try it on some traditional resin. Now, most resin flash isn't really the same as with a plastic kit, it's kind of more of a step than a flash. On this part in particular, though, there is some low-level flash that follows some of these curves around the edge and is right by some rivet details, so this is a pretty good candidate to try these blades out. Again, the Flashmaster cleans up these curved edges really nicely. So lastly, let's see how these blades work on paper and in the world of paper modeling. And for that, I'm going to bring in friend of the show, Virgil. Hey, Virgil.
Yeah.
So Virgil specializes in a type of modeling using paper, aptly called paper modeling, which requires a lot of precision cuts and bends and different types of glue and different kind of paper and all that stuff. And Virgil's really kind of a master at it and does a lot of things that I can't even dream of doing with paper. So I brought him on to test out these Flashmaster blades, and let's hear what he has to say about them.
Here, so this is an NT cutter with an NT cutter blade, but on a tight cut or an inside cut, sometimes you have to do a chisel cut. So in this section here, what I will do is do a chisel cut. So I'm actually cutting along the cut line probably about 1 millimeter at a time to go through and get the curve or the shape of what I'm cutting. Other times I will actually use a straight cut and go all the way through. And again, this is cutting on 65-pound cardstock. You have to forgive my old man eyes. And this is just like really sharp and going right through the paper. Just outside the line there, but let's see if I can't get in here and trim. So in comparison to a straight blade, sometimes you will, I find, for ease of use, using a flexible blade is ideal for cutting curves. Not necessarily a tight curve like this, but if you have a slight curve as opposed to doing a chisel cut, and this is actually doing a pretty good job of cutting through this 65-pound cardstock, and it just ease, not a lot of pressure required to go through there. And sometimes with the thinness of this blade, the paper cutting is ideal, and presumably to do some trimming on paper as well. So as you can see here, I'm just doing these pieces that will actually be in contact with each other once it's cut through and assembled. And let me see if I can't cut through this fairly quick and see how they will go together. That looks like I was outside the line, but for ease of trimming. The straight X-Acto blade is going to depend on the curve. So with the short blade, doing a tight curve, you'd want to chisel cut. With an X-Acto blade, you could presumably do it. The cut's going to be a little rougher and a little bit thick due to the thickness of the X-Acto blade. This is a finer cut and an easier cut than with an X-Acto blade.
All right, so we heard from you when you were using it and doing some paper cutting. Did you have any final thoughts you wanted to share?
Sure. So the blade is super sharp and super thin, so I did not have any issues cutting through the 110-pound cardstock, and presumably it will go as well through 65-pound cardstock, which is my primary cutting medium. It's nice and flexible, so if you're going around a curve on the paper, you shouldn't have any issues going around a curve. With regards to the flexibility, it has a nice flexibility on the blade. The only downside to the blade is that, actually two, is one is the tip of the blade is rounded. Not an issue with a straight cut or doing a small, wide cut, but if you're trying to get into a corner or an angled cut, you're going to have some difficulty doing that. The other issue with the blade is, since the blade is so thin and so flexible, a specialized holder would be handy as well. So if you're working with 3 count, 4, 5, 6, and different blades associated with that, that actually makes it a lot for this particular blade. Depending on what you're doing, what you're cutting, it's another tool to have in the drawer. Overall, it will not replace your X-Acto blade, but it's a nice tool to have in your arsenal as an alternative. And it's, again, super sharp. No issues with the sharpness on the blade itself and the way that it cuts.
Thanks, Virgil.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
So let's talk about longevity. Now, since these blades are so thin, I really expected them to break very easily. But after a few hours of use just for this video, they're basically still good to go. The blades get a little bit curved, but that doesn't seem to affect their cutting properties, at least when removing flash. So overall, I think the Flashmaster is an excellent addition to the toolbox. It won't replace the traditional number 11 blade by any means, but then again, it isn't really intending to. For small, delicate parts, I could really see this as being an essential tool for any modeler. If you want to try these out for yourself, check out the link in the description, and as always, thanks for watching. I've got a ton more videos in the pipeline, including the long overdue second part of my Allosaurus build, and hope that you'll subscribe to keep us going. Alright, we'll see you next time.